narrators. So there would be jurists, there would be scholars who would actually study the life of narrators of the sayings of the Prophet. They would study their lives from their birth till their death. And they would study what was their reputation among people. Whether people who had good, positive reputation, and were they liars, for example, or whether people used to say Sadiq and Amin, truthful, people used to take granted. Or also, how was their memory? Did they have a weak memory? Obviously, a 70-year-old man's memory is not equal as the memory of a 25-year-old young man. So they would say, what was his memory like? What was his belief like? Did he also practice on the Islam? Because when somebody says, the Prophet says so, but he himself is not practicing on Islam, for example, he's not praying himself. So you can't really put your trust into his words. He could be lying. So this is the reason why this whole science actually came into existence. So the classification of hadith was invented. Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, are now classified into various categories. Some of them are, you don't need to write this. Some of them are sahih, exact truth hadith. Sahih hadith, strong narrations. Some of them are, for example, za'if, which are weak narrations. Some of them are mutawatir, which are weak because of the narrators, but they are narrated through many narrators. Many narrators have actually said the same thing. And individually, these narrators didn't have a good reputation, for example, or didn't have a good memory, but because that saying is said by not one narrator, not two, but by various chain of narrators, then this hadith would be mutawatir, for example. So the main thing is, the second source of Islamic law is the Sunnah. The third is the ijma'. And I mentioned to you that the first two are the main sources. The other three are not sources actually. They are just ways of implementing, or just ways of deriving the law. Ijma'. Ijma' is consensus of the Muslims on a particular issue, which is that a unanimous agreement, consensus of the majority of the Muslims on one singular issue, one singular particular issue, will become also law. That will be also given the recognition of law. And why is that? Because, as I mentioned, that these three sources have their roots in the Quran and Sunnah. Because there is one saying of the Prophet, which is a Sahih saying, hadith, which is a very strong hadith. And the saying is of the Prophet Muhammad is that the joining of my community is right. My followers will not join together on an error. لا تجمع أمتي على الضلالة. My followers will never join together on an error, on ignorance. So if you are in doubt on any particular issue, follow the majority of my followers. So this is the saying of the Prophet, and from this saying, the third source of Islamic law has been derived, which is, if there is a particular issue and you can't find it in the Quran, you can't find that issue in, for example, the hadith and the sayings of the Prophet, because time changes, the needs of people change. It's not important, and it's not always the case that a particular issue is found in the Quran and Sunnah. But if there is an ijma', if there is a consensus of the Muslims on that particular issue, then that ijma', that consensus, unanimous agreement will be given the authority, the recognition of law. The fourth is qiyas. Qiyas. Q-I-Y-A-S. Yes, yeah. Qiyas is the process of, what is qiyas? Qiyas is the process of analogical reasoning from a known injunction to a new injunction. Qiyas is the process of analogical reasoning from a known injunction to a new injunction. And according to this method, the ruling of the Quran and the Sunnah may be extended to a new problem, provided that the root is found in the Quran and Sunnah. For example, the qiyas, for example, use of cocaine, of use of wine. In the Quran and the Hadith itself, cocaine is never mentioned. Cocaine, I don't think, was even invented at that time in Saudi Arabia. But now there is an issue. Let's say, what what is scope? Should we? Is it halal? Is it allowed for consumption, or is it prohibited? Haram. So we can't find this issue in the Quran. We can't find it in the Hadith. These words are never mentioned. So what should we do now? And suppose we don't have an ijma, we don't have a consensus, then the qiyas is that if the asl, if the origin is found in the Quran, with analogical reasoning of a known injunction, you can invent a new injunction, which is basically that in the hadith of the Prophet, there is a saying which says that every intoxication is forbidden. Every intoxication is haram, is forbidden. So from this saying of the Prophet, you can analogically, you can reason and you can say, because cocaine is also kind of intoxication, or wine is an intoxication. So we would say, and cannabis, for example, is an intoxication. So we would say it is haram. So this is qiyas. And the last is ijtihad. Ijtihad is the process of making a legal decision by independent interpretation of the legal source. The process of making a legal decision by independent interpretation of the legal source, the Quran and the Sunnah. This ijtihad is nowadays is not used a lot, and only very high jurists and scholars are able to do that. And nowadays it's not used anymore, so I don't think we should concentrate on this. Let us now talk about the doctrine of jihad. The doctrine of jihad, what is jihad and the types of jihad? I know that many of you think it's about war, but jihad, what does it literally mean? Jihad in Arab, from an Arabic root word, comes from a root word which is juhud, which is J-U-H-D, juhud, J-U-H-D, which means to struggle, to effort, to struggle. So literally it means jihad literally means to struggle. And technically, jihad itself does mean to struggle positively for the betterment of society and for peace within the society. This is what technically jihad means, to struggle for peace in society. And jihad, J-I-H-A-D, there are various different types of jihad. And normally when you hear jihad, you always think about killing people, slaughtering people. But jihad, there are various types of jihad. And one of them is obviously fighting, fighting a war against others. But I would like to mention all of them. The first is, the first is jihad bil ilm. You can see that there are doctrine of jihad and types of jihad. Jihad bil ilm, which is jihad through knowledge, which is to strive through knowledge for the betterment of society. And there is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, which is that to struggle against illiteracy and ignorance in society itself is also jihad. So to struggle against ignorance in society, against illiteracy, is also jihad. The second is jihad bil amal, jihad by conduct, struggle by conduct, which is to do a particular act for the betterment of society. And again, I will give you a reference for that. There is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, which is imatatul azani tariq, which is removing a stone from a path where people walk. Removing a stone from that path is also considered as jihad, with the intention that if maybe somebody can fall down because of the stone, maybe somebody can get himself injured because of that stone. So to remove that obstacle, which can give pain, or which can so to remove that is also jihad. So this is then jihad bil amal, through conduct. The third one is jihad bil mal, which is jihad through donating, to donate for charity, to donate against people who against the poverty of people. For example, to donate in the way of God to poor people is also considered as jihad. And then there is obviously one of the pillars of Islam known as zakat. This is one of the pillars of Islam, that a Muslim has to give 2.5% of his income every year to the poor people. And it doesn't matter whether you give it to Muslims or non-Muslims, they should be poor, that's the only requirement. So jihad bil mal. And again, for jihad bil mal, there is also a saying of the Prophet, and jihad bil mal is derived from that saying, which is having a huge bank balance, having a huge collection of money, of wealth, is seen as a sin in the eyesight of Almighty God if one does not share it with others. If one does not just collect money, collect wealth, but he doesn't share it with others, he doesn't pay his zakah, he doesn't give it to people when they come to him when they are in need, and he keeps everything for himself, this is considered as a sin in Islam. So from this, the jihad bil mal is derived. The fourth is jihad bin nafs. Jihad bin nafs is against false ego, against one's evil desires. To struggle against one's evil desires. One's ego is known as jihad. And to struggle, and what is this? I'll give a few examples. For example, alcohol is forbidden in Islam. Alcohol. To refrain from alcohol, from adultery, from stealing, from lying, from backbiting. All these things are also jihad in Islam. They are jihad by jihad bin nafs, against one ego, because your ego wants you to, has desires always, and wants you to enjoy, and wants you to do this and that. To go against that ego is known as jihad. And important note here that the Prophet Muhammad said about this kind of jihad, that this is the jihad al-akbar. This is the greatest jihad. This is the highest level of jihad. So the highest level of jihad in Islam, of struggling, is not fighting in a battle. It's not fighting against people. It is fighting against your own ego, against your own evil desires. The fifth one, and the one which is arguments, and I gave you examples of, like I said, jihad bil ilm, jihad bil amal, jihad bil nafs. There is a saying, there is a background, the Prophet said so, and because of his saying, or the Quran, Allah said so, because of that, this is right. Again, now we must focus on this, that jihad bil qital, where is this derived from? Where does this come from? Now, the background of the Muslims is important and relevant to this. As you know, the Prophet Muhammad, he spread Islam, and he started preaching Islam in Mecca. There were all people who used to worship idols. They went all against him, and they went all against the Muslims, and also amazingly, the people who joined Islam were the most weakest people in society, like slaves. They would attach themselves to Islam, like people who were not rich. There were some rich as well, obviously, but you had more poor people, and they would come to Islam very easily. And the reason was because Islam provided for them securities, but this is not a topic of today. And if I get a chance another time to tell you why did Islam spread so quickly, what was it? Now, the Muslims in Mecca, those who converted to Islam, they had to face a lot of trouble, a lot of hardship. And some of them were killed, some of them's wealth was taken from them. And even the Prophet Muhammad, with his family, even though he married the richest women living at that time in Mecca, Khadija, he married her, the richest woman. And the reason he married her was because she proposed him. And she was 40 years old, he was 35, she was 15 years older than him. So he accepted this marriage, and even Khadija accepted Islam. And she donated in the will of Islam, in the will of God. And many people at that time had to face a boycott from the Meccans, a 3 years boycott. All Muslims were forced to live in a mountain, in a cave in a mountain, and for 3 years, without basic necessities. They were obviously, some of them rich people, Khadija, his wife, richest women living in Mecca at that time, big tradeswomen. Everyone was forced to leave their wealth and go and live in caves, and they were boycotted in this way that no Meccan would actually sell them anything. Even if they would have the money for it, nobody would sell it to them. They had boycotted them for 3 years. After this boycott, the Meccans, because the Prophet Muhammad was from a very influential family, they stopped the boycott because of some influences and because of many reasons. After 3 years, they said these people don't listen and these people don't, go away from Islam. So they just stopped the boycott. But they said, now we have to kill them because they don't stop preaching Islam by boycotting them. And we have taken all the basic necessities from them, but still they are talking about Islam, talking about one God. So now let us get rid of them. So they planned, the Meccans planned to kill the Muslims and firstly kill the Prophet Muhammad. So if they kill him, all the inspiration, motivation will be gone. And then the Muslims, they decided to migrate to the city of Medina. The city of Medina, they migrated there. In the city of Medina, there were many Jews, and Jews were actually living in that city. But because some tribes of Jews, they converted to Islam, so they invited the Prophet, and he went to Medina, and they lived with peace with the Jews for a few months. The Meccans, they were continuing with their conspiracy of killing the Prophet and killing the Muslims because they couldn't see, and they saw it as against their self-respect, against their ego. Somebody from our city goes to another place and everybody is with him and everybody's making fun of us now. So they wanted to kill him. They made a force, and an army was sent to Medina to attack the Muslims. And at that time, the first revelation of the Holy Quran came, which deals with jihad bil qital. And I will just give you the translation of that. The first revelation, which deals with the subject of the Prophet is revealed in the Quran. So the first revelation in which Allah has revealed that the Muslims now, this is also a jihad, to fight in the battle. Now the verses in the Surah 22, verse number 39 and 40. Those upon whom war is made by unbelievers are granted permission to fight because they are being oppressed. Verily, God is most powerful to aid them, and have been expelled from their homes in defiance of right for the sole crime of saying, our Lord is God. So this was the first revelation in which Muslims were allowed to take weapons in their hands, allowed to defend themselves. And this verse, and what happened was that the Muslims, they had 313 people fighting against 1,100 non-Muslims, and the Muslims actually won that battle. It was the first battle, the Battle of Badr. Battle of Badr, B-A-D-R. The first battle of Muslims. And the Muslims, they won this battle. And the Meccans, those who were left, they were forced to go back to Mecca. So as you can see, the first battle of Islam started, and the motivation behind it was self-defense. Now, I would like to give you a break here, and after the break, we will discuss just war in Islam, and we'll discuss when is war